Hi everyone. I've decided to film the live conference that we were going to do today at 6 p.m. because I tried this experiment with my undergrad course on Tuesday, and there were some issues with the recording in Canva. So, because I want to make sure that you are able to view this video at any point because of the things that I'll be discussing in here, the conference feature in Canvas only allows you to watch the videos for up to 2 weeks. I checked in the discussion board I created for questions or topics that you may want for me to talk about today, and I didn't see anything. So I'm just gonna go ahead and stick with the topic that I had for today, which was assessment and diagnosing. And what I'll do is I'll use our midterm assignment as my guide to frame this discussion. And I think it hopefully will give you some useful tips and information on what I'm looking for you to do in the midterm assignment. So I know assessing and diagnosing can be quite complex if you don't have experience in the field of social work. But based on your introductions, contrary to other semesters, I feel a little bit more confident in this class capability of um, performing better, or the possibility of you performing better, because it seems that many of you either have professional experience or field placement experience, even if it's not with children and adolescents. Some of you may be familiar or not with diagnosing. So even if you're not, I'm gonna try to make this as simple and easy um, as I can. So let's start. I printed out the instructions for the midterm assignment so that I don't forget everything and I can go in order. Basically, what I'm asking you to do is to select. You're going to see when you click in the assignments section of Canvas, you're going to choose like the first midterm assignment, the one that is due in March. And when you click in there, you're going to see there is like the instructions in bullet points. You're gonna see then that I have like the case examples or the vignettes that I want you to use to build um, the exam, and then you're gonna have the rubric, which is like the little square table, which has kind of like what each section is worth in the assignment. So this is how it should look like in your Canvas, right? You're gonna have like a brief description. Then it might look a little bit different because I took out like this sample, this one's, I took it out to avoid confusing you, but the rest is still the same. These are the case studies that you need to be able to complete the midterm assignment, and I'll get to that in a minute. And then you have this. This is the rubric, and this is where it tells you where how much every section is worth. So what you'll do is that you're going to pick one child case and one adolescent case. There are 4 cases in total, 2 for adolescents and 2 for children. You read the instructions, it prompts you to select 1 for child and 1 for adolescents. Now, once you do that, you're gonna write a 8 to 10 page paper in total for both cases, right? You can split them as however you want, but sometimes students split it half and half, like 5 pages for the adolescent and 5 pages for the child. And what you'll basically be conducting is an assessment and a diagnostic formulation of the client in this case example. So only one per each, one case of a child and one case of the adolescents. You do not need to do the 4 cases that are in there. Now I'm gonna go into the specific aspects of it in terms of the content, and I'm gonna use that to help you explain how to adequately diagnose and formulate a diagnosis. But first, let me quickly get out some administrative issues, which also students ask a lot about grammar, APA formatting, length that I just detailed, and things like that. So first with length, please be advised that I have some flexibility with length. Obviously, if you do 11 pages instead of 10, I'm not gonna create an issue out of that. But because you are 30 to 31 students in this class, and I have another class, I do not have the luxury of reading extra amount of pages in order for me to grade your papers on time. So I'm gonna please ask you to stick with the length of 10 pages if you can, and if for some reason you go above, it cannot be more than a page or so. Obviously, the 8 to 10 pages do not include any references that you may use if you wish to. And I'll get to references also in a minute. APA formatting, please make sure that you follow APA guidelines. Again, I'm not really picky if you make some tiny grammar errors here and there. What I'm most concerned are papers that are hard for me to understand what you're writing, that the information doesn't flow correctly, that it's confusing for me as a reader. But if you make a couple of grammar mistakes, I'm not gonna make like a terrible fuss about it. Obviously, if your paper is full of grammar mistakes, that's a different situation, but I tend to be a little bit flexible with those things. I'm mostly concerned of how you structure your papers, that you write paragraphs in a coherent and sequential manner, and that hopefully you'll have the minimal amount of grammar and writing mistakes. And if you are referencing any articles, just make sure that you include a references page as part of APA guidelines at the end as well. I think maybe for the final paper you'll find yourself using more references. I don't think it'll be used that much in this paper because it's mostly assessing or diagnosing. So maybe you will cite one of the textbooks, or you'll cite one of my presentations, or a video, or the materials that I've given you. But I'm not really expecting really a lot of outside resources, and I'll get to that in a minute, because I think where maybe you'll use some outside citations or references is when we get into the planning and intervention aspect. But I just wanted to highlight that because I don't want you to get concerned, oh my god, do I need to include 5-10 articles? You don't. I'll get to that in a minute with the planning and intervention. If you include 2 articles, that would be enough for me. 2 or 3 articles, it's in the ballpark. But I'll get to that in a minute. And then the other aspect is that I'm please asking everyone to submit your midterms on time, or I have like a flexible deadline for midterms. I think in the syllabus I wrote about that, so make sure that you comply with whatever I wrote in the syllabus so that I can grade your papers promptly. After the flexible dates that I grant students, I obviously will not accept papers unless there's like a circumstance that merits it. I think I'm not forgetting anything from the administrative aspects. If I do, do not feel embarrassed to contact me or ask me for follow-up questions. Obviously, paper is double spaced, following APA guidelines. And aside from that, I don't think I want to highlight anything else to avoid being extremely long in this video. It will be long anyways, but I don't want to add additional information. Now, going into the specifics, the instructions are the same for the child and the adolescent case. So I'm going to use the adolescent case as an example, but you're going to have to do the same thing for both, as you'll see in the instructions. So I'm really asking you to describe the symptoms first of all. So how do you do that? You do that by using DSM-5. I'm hoping that all of you have had access to DSM-5, either that you have a copy of your own, that you have used the instructions that I provided to get access through the library. Worst case scenario, if you Google, let's say for example, DSM-5 generalized anxiety disorder diagnosis, there are publishers out there that print out like this kind of handouts with the diagnosis, and you'll be able to access that online. So there's really not an excuse for you not to find a diagnosis and the symptoms, even if you're having trouble locating the book. You should be able to also find it online. I think there's a great resource course like Pearson Education, that if you typed in Google or your search engine the diagnosis like DSM-5, social anxiety disorder, generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and maybe type Pearson next to it, you'll be able to get a really nice handout in which it specifies the description and the symptoms online, in case you don't have the DSM-5. And obviously, you have my PowerPoint presentations also to guide you a little bit in the description of symptoms and things related to diagnosing. So you get the description of the symptoms from the DSM, and the DSM-5 usually has like within each of the diagnoses, you're gonna find that it gives like criteria in order for you to be able to give the diagnosis. So criteria A, B, C, D, and so forth and so forth on. So that is where you get the information of the symptoms that you need for the case studies. Now, I'm going to go back a little bit because I think I skipped something that's very important. You're going to obviously describe the symptoms that your client has in that case example. So for the adolescent, what I really want you to do is to tell me briefly what are the main symptoms that client is displaying. And then you're going to do the step that I just described. Then you're going to go into the DSM-5 and try to see these symptoms, what diagnosis it matches, right? So basically what I'm asking you to do is, Professor Diana, this is a description of the symptoms my client has. So for example, the adolescent case, if it says the client has been having difficulty paying attention in class, is having tantrums at home, is fighting with his siblings, hasn't been able to sleep in a week, whatever description that you get of the case in terms of symptoms or problem areas, that's what you're going to put in the description of the areas, right? Problems with school, problems with concentration, problems with attention, problems with socializing, your client is having hallucinations, delusions, your client is having substance use problems, your client is constantly arguing with parents or siblings, whatever symptoms slash problems your client is demonstrating, that's what you're going to describe in the symptoms. Now keep in mind there's a page limit, so what I want you to do is to kind of synthesize and summarize the most critical symptoms. And after that, we're going to go to bullet point number 2, which is what I just described. What diagnosis would you give this adolescent, and why? Substantiate with DSM-5 criteria. So what you're going to do first is go to DSM-5 and see what diagnosis captures this best the symptoms that your client is having, right? Um, and once you identify that, then what you're going to do is justify or substantiate. Substantiate means justify. So what I want you to do is something along the line. So, okay, so Professor Diana, here are the symptoms for adolescent A. I think he meets criteria for social anxiety disorder as specified in the DSM-5 or ADHD as specified in the DSM-5. And this is why. And then you're going to go and match the symptoms with the criteria for that diagnosis. So, for example, if you're telling me your client is having ADHD symptoms, I expect you to do something along the lines. Well, my client has A, B, C, D, and symptoms, and for the DSM-5 ADHD, in order for a clinician to diagnose this disorder, the client needs to meet 4 out of the 5 symptoms, and my client meets 4 out of those, and they are A, B, C, and D. My client also meets the duration criteria. My client also meets the onset criteria. My client is also meeting this other criteria from the ADHD diagnosis. So pretty much what I want you to do is pair it up. So if I have this symptom, where do I find that in the DSM-5 criteria for that specific diagnosis, right? If I'm saying that my client is inattentive, how do I pair that up with the ADHD criteria? If I'm saying my client is fidgety or arguing with classmates, how do I pair that up with the criteria for ADHD on DSM-5? And so forth and so forth. So basically, it's matching your symptoms with your DSM-5 criteria for the diagnosis that you think is the one that you should give your client. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky with the differential diagnosis, and I'm going to stop the video here because I want to split it in 2 parts, and the other part is going to address the remainder of the questions.